We have a very, very great day today, and we have an interesting conversation to have. So I'd like to welcome our speaker today, Lynn. Lynn, how are you doing?
Hello, good. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you very much. And so I would like us to also I would like to welcome everybody joining us from different parts of the world. Before we start with Lynn, we would like you to answer a quick question. So we'd like to know you a bit more. And while doing that, Lynn, can you tell our audience who you are? Where you are based, everything they think they should know about you, and what we hope to achieve at the end of today's session.
Yes, absolutely. So my name is Lynn Walsh. I'm the assistant director at Trusting News. I am based in San Diego, California. And prior to joining Trusting News, which we're going to talk a lot about Trusting News and building trust, so I'll tell you a little bit more about just my background before talking about what we do at Trusting News. But before joining Trusting News, I worked as a journalist, primarily an investigative journalist working in local television in the US. So I've worked in different states like Ohio, Florida, Texas, and California. I also am a former president of the Society of Professional Journalists and a former ethics chair for the organization. So ethics is very important to me. I'm assuming since you are here, it's probably something that's important to you as well. And it goes hand in hand with trust. In addition, I do some freelance work, working and doing my own reporting, not as much as I'd like to, but a little bit of that. And at Trusting News, what we do, our goal is to help journalists rebuild trust with their audience. And we're going to talk a lot about that, how to do that, give some tips specifically about how to do that related to basically the changing information landscape that we have, which in a lot of cases involves the changing technologies that are becoming available and how people are consuming information.
That's so beautiful. Thank you very much,
Mhm.
Lynn. And to everybody online, if you were with us last week, you know that we are really, really interested in knowing more about you. So please, I'm already seeing a lot of conversations in our chat box, and we really, really welcome attendees from different parts of the world. Please, the call the quiz that you are looking at on your screen right now would enable us to have a much better understanding of who you are. And I'd like to know who is joining us for the first time. How many sessions? Go to the chat box and tell us the total number of sessions that you've attended. And don't be shy. We'd like to know how many sessions you've attended, who is attending the first session. Thank you, Brenda. Brenda has attended the 3 sessions. That's lovely. Thank you very much, Brenda. I hope you've enjoyed this session so far. I want to Ali is joining us for the first time. You're very much welcome. And Shiva too is new. Thank you very much for joining us. Fortune has attended the 3 sessions. That's really, really beautiful. Louise is the second one. Okay, thank you very much for joining us. Oh, Farah is just joining us. We appreciate you. Please, I really want everybody to tell us how many sessions you've attended. And I also want everybody to fill the poll that is still on your screen right now. We are at 59% of all attendees, and I think we can do much better than that. So please, we want to know we want to have this information from as many of you as possible. And yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much. And we are almost ready to start, but I really want this survey to go beyond 59% that it currently is. Sebastian is saying this is the fourth session. No, this is the third session. Probably there was a session that was held that I wasn't aware of. So we are really, really happy to be here today. Lynn, where are you based?
I am in San Diego, California, so the
Oh,
United
okay.
States. Yes.
What was the local time today?
It is about 8 a.m. Yeah, a little after. So 8:07. So a little early, but that's okay. I know it's late for some of you, midday for others.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think quick recap regarding the sessions that we've had. So the goal of this summit has been targeted at journalists, fact checkers, and students from across the world who we have been gathering every Thursday in March to focus on big and pressing challenge, which is how to disseminate reliable, trustworthy content in innovative ways that outpace misinformation. And our expert trainers have been leading virtual sessions. And it's worthy to note that this summit is not just happening in English language. We have it happening in other languages too: Arabic, Bahasa Indonesia, French, Portuguese, Russian, and Spanish. On March 7, we started our series with a session on building networks and alliances. Last week, we had a session on reaching critical audiences. And while today, Lynn will be leading the session on strengthening audience trust. And as many of you that have been with us on this journey would be aware that we've said at the end of this series, which is last week, we are going to be having a grant application that will officially kick off. And I've been stating that we would like you to give us your very best ideas, go as wide as possible, and hopefully you will be applying some of the information that you've gained in this webinar series. I'm just holding up. If we can get two more people to sign this first to fill this poll, then we are ready to, I'm ready to yield the floor to Lynn. And while waiting for those two more people to fill the poll, I would like Lynn to start. Do you want to sharing your screen so that we know that
Yes,
it's running smoothly? And so
absolutely.
please, we want to hear from you uh, very well. So regarding the result that I'm looking so far, we have almost gender balance, and this is really amazing. Thank you very much. And I know some people are just trying up for this first time. So we have people from Sierra Leone. Thank you, Hedri, for joining us from Sierra Leone. We have Nyongaze from Rwanda, Ali from Pakistan, Ajibola from Stellenbosch in South Africa. Thank you very much. Are you ready for us? Lynn, do you want to take?
Sure,
Uh,
I can go ahead and get started. Are we ready?
yes, please. Yes, please. The floor is yours.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Really glad to be here with everyone today, tonight, this morning, wherever you are in the world. Um, Please know I will put a link to these slides in the chat so you can have them afterward. And I will also make sure that you have a way to get in touch with me if you have follow-up questions, because a lot of the work that we do here at Trusting News is all about trying to make sure that these strategies to help build trust actually do get implemented into news content. And so I'd love to see examples of anything that you try that we talk about, or if you want advice on something that you are facing where you are, a specific story, I'd love for you to reach out. So just kind of say that to set the tone. And I'm going to go through some slides, then I'm going to pause for some questions. And then I'm going to focus a little bit on misinformation and specifically AI. I know there is a session on AI. I believe that still is coming. So I'm just going to, I have a couple slides on some ideas around trust there. But so at Trusting News, we work to help journalists rebuild trust. We do that through research. I'm not a researcher, but we partner with researchers. We also will help newsrooms conduct their own research, which sometimes can be as simple as community surveys, doing some focus groups, that type of thing. But our whole goal is, how can we look at how news consumers feel about the news consumption process and help journalists better understand that and better work to build trust with their community. And so, really quickly, I do want to kind of set the tone of the state of trust in news around the world. Unfortunately, it is low. This is the latest data from the Reuters Digital News Report, which I think is probably the most all encompassing data when it comes to looking at where trust in news and information stands around the world. Now, not all countries are represented in this, and I know that can be problematic, especially if your country isn't, but it is the most all-encompassing. So we're going to start here. And if you have questions about specific countries or want more information, again, I'll be sharing these slides, and there's a link to all of this data in the slide. But basically, trust is on the decline. The number of people who trust in news most of the time is at around 42%. That's an average around countries. What's interesting is there were some gains seen at the height of the pandemic, where actually people started trusting in news a little bit more around the world. Those gains have actually come down. So we are not seeing that same level of trust, unfortunately. When we look at where trust in news and information is the highest, Finland remains the highest. Countries like Sweden also tend to top that list. The lowest, according to the most recent data, is the US and Slovakia. Also, countries that are in South America tend to also be on that list as well. So from research that we have done at Trusting News and other research that has been done either by Reuters, by Pew, by Gallup, we know that the likelihood of someone trusting in news and information is going to differ depending on who they are. And again, this is kind of speaking very widely, kind of very general, but young people tend to distrust news more. So older people tend to trust news. Younger people tend to distrust news more. Older people tend to trust news more. When we're talking about the type of news that you are asking people if they trust, people do tend to trust local news or news they consume more than national news. Other things that can impact someone's likelihood to trust in news can be their political affiliation. Especially, we know here in the US, people who identify as conservatives or Republicans tend to distrust in news more than Democrats or independents. When this kind of surveying has been done in other countries, there are similar trends of people and party difference when it comes to trust. The other thing that we know, and I'm going to hit on this a lot throughout, kind of a basic, if you want to like talk to people or explain why people distrust in news and the journalism that you're doing. We know that if people don't know how journalism works, so they don't know all of the things you do throughout the reporting process, basic things like fact checking, how you choose stories, the fact that you do fact check, because some people don't assume that we do, and we do. The fact that you look carefully and vet sources, who you are talking to, right? You spend time thinking about who that source is, which source makes the most sense to talk to for a specific story. All of these things that you do, if we do not tell our audience and our community that we are doing them, they probably are not assuming that we are. They're not thinking that we are. And instead, they actually assume that we don't. So they are going to assume that you don't fact check, that you only talk to people that you know or that you like, or that you are trying to push or forward their agenda or some kind of political agenda. And so all of those assumptions, which tend to be negative, and also in a lot of cases, hopefully, especially for all of you here, I'm sure, are incorrect assumptions, right? We are here practicing responsible, accurate, ethical journalism. If we're doing those things, then all of those negative assumptions aren't true. But if those negative assumptions lead to that distrust, it leads people to think that you have an agenda, that you are biased, that you are trying to potentially deceive. That's what they think. So we need to get on the record and tell them that's not what we're doing. And I'm going to talk a lot about that today. The other thing that's important to keep in mind, we as journalists, I know for me, myself, I really do believe journalism is a public service. So I believe information is essential to communities for people to make decisions in their lives. And journalists stand in that very unique and important spot to provide that information to people. People are often too busy to fact check on their own. So we fill that responsibility for them. Because of that, I think a lot of times when we're covering stories, we look at that as we're helping the community. We're trying to do something to help you. That is great. And I do think that is what we're trying to do. Unfortunately, though, people do not always see it that way. And so we need to work on talking about our goals and our mission, which I have some examples of that as well. So there's a lot more research on this topic. I'm sure if you are here today, you probably have seen other research, maybe specific to your country, to your community. Maybe you've done your own research. But if you want more information or to dive a little deeper, we have a deck that we update on different research. Again, we have done, and that has been done elsewhere around the world. So that link is available, publicly available for you to learn more and dive a little deeper. So why does all of this matter? Why do we care if people trust in us as journalists and trust in our publication? Well, at the very basic level, if they don't trust us, they're not going to consume our content. At a very basic level, if they're not consuming our content, can we even survive? If people, can we make money? Can we get advertising dollars? Can we have memberships? And the answer is no. We'll probably see layoffs. We'll see news organizations disappear. We'll see news deserts. So that's at a very basic level. The other thing, though, that I think is more important is if they don't trust us, they're not going to consume our content. And again, if you are here, I'm assuming you believe and you are practicing ethical, responsible, accurate reporting. If we want people to consume that content and have that accurate information to make decisions in their lives, we need them to consume our content. Because the thing is, if they aren't consuming our content, if they aren't consuming accurate information, they aren't consuming news, it doesn't mean that they're not getting information. People are still getting information. People really do need information to go about their daily lives, whether it's simple things about the weather, how they get to work, what they buy at the grocery store, or more complex things like who to vote for, if they should be supporting a specific candidate or issue. So information is something that people still will be getting. The question then is, where are they getting it? And are those sources reliable, ethical, and responsible? In some cases, they absolutely may be, which is great. But unfortunately, because of how we consume information and news, there are a lot of spaces where people go for information. They make assumptions that it's true. They make decisions based off of it. And it's rumors. It's information that hasn't been fact checked. It's information that hasn't been, there's no context. It's half the story. It's one side of the story. It's information being pushed by a specific agenda or individual who wants to achieve something. Or it's being purposefully put out there because people are trying to deceive people. And so when we think about the importance of this, it is really like, what does that mean for us, for society, for the world, if we do not have a majority of people consuming content that is accurate, that is responsible, that provides all of this context? And so that's why it's so important, if you are practicing this type of journalism, to work on trust. So I'm going to try not to spend any more time on kind of the problems. I want to give you solutions because I think that's really important. We have a lot of vetted solutions, researched solutions about what you can do as a journalist. And we want this to be actionable. We want more journalists doing these things. So the first thing you can do is accept that journalism has a trust problem. And this is really kind of across the board. Around the world, we have to do a better job of building trust with our audience in our communities. Once you accept that, then it's to think about, okay, how can I work this into what I do as a reporter, as an editor, as a producer, right? How can I work this into my job? Because we all really should be thinking about this and working it into what we do on a daily basis. And so at Trusting News, when we first talk to journalists about trust, we talk about some basic kind of principles that we like to set the tone of to kind of help people understand how to approach building trust, because it can feel overwhelming, it can feel frustrating, it can make you angry, and that's okay, those are normal feelings. But when we set the tone with some of this, I hope that maybe we can move on from some of those feelings and start going to the action. So the first thing that we talk to people about is that you can't persuade everyone to trust you, to trust your publication, or to trust journalism or the media in general. When I first joined Trusting News, that was my goal. I was like, we're gonna solve this trust issue. And I do think we're making hopefully some progress. I know data doesn't always show that. And I think it's a good goal. But if you set out to say, every single person I talk to in my community, I'm going to convince them to trust me, you probably will get burned out and you probably will become very frustrated and maybe angry. And so, what we like to do at Trusting News is think about our audience, our community. And we know that there are a lot of people that are more in the middle. So, you have your fans that love you. That's great. You want to continue that relationship. Then you have people in the middle who may not know a lot about you. They're just making a lot of assumptions. Then you have people who really just don't like you. Maybe they constantly complain. We're going to say focus on those people in the middle. There are more out there than you may think. And there are more people willing to learn about what you do and basically trust you and consume your content. So if you start from that, hopefully you won't get burned out as quickly and you will be willing to kind of put some of these things into action. The other thing we like to think about is think about what it is like to be a news consumer. Now, this is really important as we're thinking about how information flows, where people get information, and the advances made in technology. Being a news consumer is confusing and it is overwhelming. The other thing is that most people have a very casual relationship with news. We as journalists are not most people. We probably get a push alert or we subscribe to a lot of newsletters. We kind of constantly are consuming information. That is not necessarily how a lot of our community operates. They are trying to fit this in bite-sized amounts, maybe by scrolling on social media, maybe by turning on the local news, maybe by subscribing to a newspaper or getting a newsletter, but it's a much more casual relationship. So it's important to think about all of that because if we try to produce news for people like us who are consuming a lot more information, maybe more technically savvy in some cases, or at least understand the information landscape better, we aren't going to be able to reach our community as well. If you think about it this way too, it also hopefully will allow you to have some empathy for what this process is like. And so when someone contacts you or puts a comment about your story, and it's a negative comment, it's criticism, instead of wanting to react and be angry, let's instead look at it as an opportunity to engage with them and explain how we did something and not assume that they already know what happens when we use an anonymous source, that they already know that we fact check, because people don't know this process. Just like you may not know, or I may not know exactly what everything that goes on that a plumber does or a nurse, whatever other occupation. And then the two other things that I want to hit on before getting into some solutions here, we totally recognize that there are things that journalists can do, and that's what we focus on. We also know there are things that news consumers could do to make this process easier. Media literacy does work. There are things that they could learn. We also know that there are things politicians might be able to do and things that tech companies or social media platforms might be able to do to help with this problem of trust and information. But what we focus on at Trusting News is what can we as journalists do? And then most importantly, you're not going to get credit and people are not going to see all of the care and ethical decisions you put into your reporting to help the community, to protect the community, to be useful to the community, unless we tell them. So that gets to what this work involves. This work, building trust, involves a lot of transparency. How can we talk about what our goals are? What are we trying to achieve? If you are trying to help your community, we need to say that. And then back it up with stories that are helpful, are useful, right? If we're trying to inform, let's say that. If we fact check, say that. If for a specific beat, like if you cover crime, what are you trying to achieve when you cover crime stories? If you cover the environment, what are you trying to achieve with this coverage? Are you just trying to put out the most recent data about global warming, about the climate crisis? If your goal is not to try to find solutions or tie people to the information about what they can do, you should say that. Maybe, though, you do have a goal of providing solutions, trying to bring people together for conversations around this issue. Explain that too, because when you don't explain that, people make an assumption. Let's say if all that they see of your environmental or climate coverage is the latest report that comes out that is really depressing and sad and can be frightening and angry for people, for some people, they may think that, oh, you're just trying to scare me. You're using scare tactics. You're just trying to get me to click on stories, clickbait, sensationalize. If that's not your goal, explain that and then back coverage and create coverage that backs up what that goal is. When we're talking about transparency, it's all about articulating, we call it this counter narrative. So we're trying to explain to people how we do our jobs, sometimes defending our work, but you want to do it in a way that has humility and empathy again for the consumer. We don't want to be like, oh my gosh, they should know this, right? Why don't they know this? That is the wrong approach. That's not going to build trust. Instead, let's give them the benefit of the doubt and let's use it as an opportunity to engage. The other thing with transparency is we have to take advantage of the attention when we have it. So a lot of times you see news organizations write a behind the story explainer or how we did this reporting. Those are great. But if you don't attach it to the story that it pertains to, that it's related to, and when I say attach, I mean, can you link it? Can you mention it on air? And I'll give you some examples of that. People may not see it. They're actually probably not likely to see it. And so we want to make sure that we are explaining these things, but that we are including them in our daily coverage. So that's the transparency element. The other major element is engagement and responsiveness and listening. How well do we know our communities? Are we listening to them? Are we asking them what they need to make decisions in their lives? What kinds of problems are they facing that they want help with? When you think about trust, people often, in the people you trust in your lives, if you think about who do you trust, they're probably people you know and already have had a relationship, right? There's a consistency. They've showed up for you. They've been there for you. They've been responsive. You can count on them. Maybe they're not even people you actually have met. Maybe they're just people that you know from being online, but you trust them because you've had interactions, you've had conversations, they've been consistent. Maybe it's even a brand. There's something about the consistency, right? The same goes with building trust between a journalist and the community. How can we make sure that we are showing ourselves as real people who live in the community, who care about the community, who are facing similar issues? Are we willing to share certain things about ourselves? And then, are we willing to listen? Can people get in touch with us? Again, all of this is important to do. You do want to make sure you're doing it safely. And I know in some parts of the world, this is much, much more difficult than others. And so I'm glad to answer specific questions or give some specific examples about things you can do if that is an issue that you are facing. But the idea is, how can we gather feedback from the community about what they're facing? We're going to take that feedback back to the newsroom, back to our reporting, and we're going to say, you know, the majority of our community says they want more information about X. Are we providing that type of information? Do we think that would be valuable? If the answer is yes, then maybe you consider producing more stories in that direction. Maybe the answer is, we don't really necessarily think that that's a topic that makes sense for us to focus on. So then maybe you explain that. So it's not that you're necessarily letting that feedback dictate and define what you do, but you're using it to inform and potentially change and improve your coverage. When you listen, it can help build trust. So remember, mistrust is often about assumptions people make about how we do our jobs. Those assumptions are often negative. So the whole goal here is, how can you provide information to people before they make an assumption, before they make that negative assumption? It's very similar to combating misinformation. I know we have a lot of fact checkers here working for fact checking organizations. Misinformation tends to thrive when there is an information void. So you fill that information void with facts, with information that's correct, accurate. That's what we're doing in this case too. We're filling that void of them not knowing how journalism works. So then when they do ask the question, the information's right there. They don't have to make an assumption that's based on something their friend is telling them, something they're seeing online. Instead, we are telling them. And we're preventing that misassumption that's mostly negative. And so why transparency? Well, we know that being transparent can work. So there's been a lot of research done in this area. We have done research in this area. This is one example of that research. This is an example of something we call an explain your process box. Some people call it a nerd box, an information box, a transparency box, whatever you want to call it. It doesn't even have to be a box. I have some examples where it's not necessarily a box. It could be written in the story, could be shared on social. It could be put in a newsletter. It could be a video that you post to social media to talk about what you did for the story, what your goals were. But the idea is, we added these boxes to stories for news publications. In these transparency boxes, it answered questions like why we're doing this story, how we're doing this story. And in this specific example, it was a crime story. So your approach to covering crime. How do you pick which crime stories to cover, to highlight, all of that? So you answer some of those questions. This box goes into the story. And what we found is when people saw a version of the story without the box, and then they saw the version with the box, people who saw the story with that box, so with all of that transparency information, they were more likely to trust in that news content, in that journalist, in that newsroom. Now, when we're thinking about trust, when some people say they trust something, it could mean a lot of different things. And so researchers tend to break down the word trust into different buckets, right? So somebody could say they trust something and they find that it's fair. Oh, I trust something. I think it's transparent. I think it's reliable. It's trustworthy. It's reliable. It's trustworthy. It's accurate. It's trustworthy. It's informative, right? So instead of just asking people, did you trust the content? The research asked, did you find it informative? Did you find it credible? Did you find that it had integrity? And what the research found is that people who saw the trust box said that the news content was more credible, had more integrity, was more transparent, was more reliable, more accurate. It was more unbiased. They felt that it told the whole story, more informative, had a better reputation. So we know that this can help build trust. People will find that content more useful. The other good news, which being someone coming from broadcast, this is really important to me, it works in broadcast too. We've done some research to show that you can add trust language to your television content, radio content, a video on social media, and it works for that medium too. And so to do this research, what we did is we worked with a TV station in Ohio, here in the US, and we took 5 stories that had already aired and been broadcast. And I added trust language, transparency elements, explaining things about why they did a story, what their approach to covering crime was. And we then held focus groups to see which one do people like the most. And what we found is that people preferred the stories that had that trust language, that transparency language. When the reporter or the anchor explained the why, about why they were doing something, how they were doing something, that is what people preferred in the focus groups. What's so interesting to me about this is they couldn't necessarily tell me or explain exactly how the clips were different. So they didn't necessarily notice huge differences, but they felt that the stories were more personal. They provided more facts, more context, and they generally thought that they were just more complete. And so if you are working in radio, TV, producing video, please try this. It works so well also because with TV, with audio, you're hearing the person's voice. So now I'm hearing the reporter talk about why they did this, where the story idea came from, why they spoke to these sources. That can be so effective because not only are you hearing an explanation, you're getting that information, but you're also able to sort of make a connection with that person because you're hearing their voice or seeing them. If you do this, an easy way to insert this content is in intros or tags, either by reporters or anchors, or doing it in like a crosstalk. So if I'm the anchor, I have the reporter on, and I'm going to say, where did this idea for the story come from? Why are you sharing the story with us today? Then the reporter can talk about why they think it's important for the community to know this information, how they hope it might be impactful or empower the community. When you're writing all of this transparency language and talking about your goals, talking about your mission, you want to do it in a way that puts the audience and the community first. So what this means is that you're not going to say, well, I just thought it was interesting as the reporter. Well, that is transparent. I don't know that that's going to be as effective as building trust necessarily. Instead, if we are serving the community, how do you hope that this story is going to help the community or be important to the community or be something that represents the community? So you want to try to tie language to that service to the community as much as possible. It could be as basic as we have a large population of people who practice this religion or who live in this area of the community. That's why we're focusing on this. That's fine. That's a tie to the community. But maybe you can get specific and talk about what you hope this will help people with. Help them better understand something before they vote. Help them decide where to send their children to school, right? All of these different things. So making that connection to the community makes that trust language work and be more effective. So why engagement? Well, we also know that engagement works. There's been a lot of different studies on how engagement and listening can help build trust, can help build relationships. And again, a lot of trust is based on relationships. And so if you can show that you are human also, I know this sounds silly because we're like, wait, we are all human. Well, unfortunately, not everyone is making that assumption. People might assume that it's just a robot typing up these news stories, right? And so you want to show them you live in this community as well. Anything you can do to make that connection can help build trust. The other thing is if our goal really is to serve the community and help them, let's take a more kind of customer service approach to that. Let's listen. Let's make ourselves available. And again, it doesn't mean that we're picking up the phone or necessarily putting out our phone number or our personal email. Is there a form that your newsroom can collect feedback on? Is it just looking at comments on social media? Is it listening maybe remotely by holding regular kind of Zoom sessions or going to a coffee shop? All of these things show that you care about the community, you're showing up. And the key is you want to show up not when you need something for them, not just parachuting in. We want to show up for them consistently and not just when there's something happening in their community. We have a community listening guide at Trusting News, which is linked to in this presentation. And what we did is we challenged journalists to use the community interview guide to go talk to people in their community that they've never met, never interacted with, and not that they needed information for a story. So they weren't using this person as a source. The goal was to ask them, what do you think of the news coverage you see in the community? What do you want from news coverage? How could it be improved? Do you see your issues represented in the coverage that you see? And what we found is that when these conversations happened, people said they were more likely to trust in that journalist and that newsroom and more likely to subscribe, which is great. The journalists also learned so much. One, it did lead to more story ideas, which is great. But they also said it helped them improve their coverage by thinking about the topics and issues more broadly and with different perspectives. The diversity of perspective is really important. So I want to go through some examples, and then I'm going to take some time for questions. But I want to show you a little bit more about how technology and how just with the changing media landscape of a lot of people getting content on social media, online, how you can build some of this transparency and engagement into your work. So the first thing is that trust box, that transparency box. Maybe you do it with an editor's note. Maybe it is an actual box in your story. Maybe you build something that is a graphic using something like Canva or other tools that are out there to make it a photo that answers questions like how the story was reported, how we chose sources, how did we fact check, where did information come from for this story. All of these examples that I'm showing you also are great because it's putting that transparency language into the story itself, which again, we want to capture attention when we have it. This is another example of one of those boxes. In this box, though, they're able to answer multiple questions because it's collapsible. So this is something else if you're worried about how much space it's taking up on a page. Could you make it so that it can expand or collapse? Here's an example of just a note within a story. So this could be as simple as adding an editor's note. Maybe it's at the top, maybe it's at the bottom, maybe it's in the middle. Maybe it's bolding some language or making it larger than the rest of the story so that it can stand out. Those are all options that you can do. I love this example. So the idea of when you have a specific word, people can click on the word to learn more information about what that means. Now, if you don't have the capability, the technological capability to do this, that's okay. Add a sentence to the story. So why this is helpful is because, again, as journalists, especially if you have a specific beat or you've been covering something for a long time, you really do become an expert on how things in that beat work. So in this case, a zoning ordinance. Well, if someone doesn't know what a zoning ordinance is or what zoning is, the story is not going to matter much to them. They're not going to understand that impact. They might stop reading. They might not even click on it or listen to it to begin with, right? So if we can provide entryways into some of the content we're talking about so that for the casual news consumer, remember, which is most people, they don't feel that, oh, that's too complicated for me. I'm not interested in that. I've never read a story on it. It's going to be overwhelming to kind of catch up with that topic. News moves too quickly. So instead, we're kind of providing on ramps to engage those people that are the casual news consumer. They did this by using their website to create pop-up boxes. You can do this in other ways. Maybe it's newsletters that break down the basics of how elections work, that break down the basics of climate change, the environment, a specific issue, homelessness, that your community is facing. Maybe you do it with a series of videos that have like the basic 101s of the election, voting, again, any of those topics. And then you can include those explanations in these stories as you cover them. This is going to be you providing useful, helpful information, which if you can be useful and helpful, that's something that can help lead to trust, keep people coming back. And so I really love this, providing some kind of on-ramp, definitions, explanations, so people can feel as if they can consume the content even if they're not an expert on the topic. Another thing you can do using a newsletter, using text service, using WhatsApp, just ask people, our goal with this story was to inform you, was to help you vote. Was this helpful to help you vote? We tried in this story to find diverse perspectives. Did you feel that there were diverse perspectives represented? Yes or no? That kind of quick surveying, quick question can give you great feedback about how to then maybe potentially improve the story or do something differently for next time. If your goal was to help people vote, but your feedback is that, actually, no, that wasn't helpful because I didn't know where to go. Well, now you know, okay, next time, let's make sure we help people at least know where to go to vote. And maybe provide more of those kind of very basic things that we sometimes forget about as we've been covering a topic for a long time. In this example, they were able to add this helpful, not helpful button to their website. The New York Times sometimes does that as well. But you can do this in a lot of different ways. Quick polls on social media. You could add it as a question on a social post that you do, a newsletter, again, using WhatsApp, a texting service, anything like that. Here's another example where whenever there is a story on this website of the Capitol Journal, they're saying, submit your news. So this is something that I think we as journalists forget about. Most people do not go walking around and just in their daily life think, I'm going to contact the newsroom. I have a great story for them. I'm going to contact a journalist. They have so many other things going on. That's not top of mind. So we have to ask people, what's going on in your world? What would you like more information on? And now in this case, they say submit your news. And they say, we're always interested in hearing about news in our community. Let us know what's going on. I think that's a good first step. I think to improve it, remember, people may not know what you mean when you say submit your news or what's a news story. So instead, use questions like, what do you want more information about in the community? What's a problem you're facing that you would like to help finding a solution? Um, what's something that's been interesting to you lately or been top of mind lately? So you're asking it in a different way. And then depending on the answers you get, you can kind of use your own news judgment and policies and strategies in your approach to decide what to cover. But I love that they have this, it's right there all the time. Something we have found with, in a question that I often get, don't people get sick of seeing these transparency language, seeing a box like that? So far, we have yet to have a newsroom get complaints about that, like a box like this saying submit your news showing up too often, or someone complaining like, oh, that box is always there asking me to submit my news, or asking me for feedback, or telling me how they use an anonymous source. That just has not happened. And I think what that demonstrates is that, one, people are casual news consumers. People are not necessarily seeing it every time, even though they're consuming your content. And they're distracted. And so that kind of constant reminder actually is not something that we have found could be harmful. So they also, at the bottom of their stories, have another idea, another way for you to submit a story idea. They ask you if the information in this article was useful, thumbs up, thumbs down, and a call to join a newsletter. So this is another example of providing more information about what the type of reporting a story is. And so down here at the bottom, they have these buttons on the story that says, this was original reporting. This was on the ground. Sources cited. So then when you click on those, it tells you what that means. So what this signals to the news consumer is that, oh, this is original reporting. Well, what does that mean? That means it contains new firsthand information uncovered by the reporters. What does on the ground mean? On the ground means that the person was physically present to report on the article from that location. So again, this lends to credibility. We actually were there when we reported on this. And you can do this in a way that maybe does not have the same technological capabilities of adding it to a website. You can add that to the top of a story. You can say, when reporter X was in this location, we were here for this location. We actually spoke to people on the ground. That kind of language can add credibility. So I want to stop there for a second. I'm going to stop sharing and just see if there are any major questions. And I'm not sure, Paul, if you were there to maybe help me, if you've seen anything pop up that might be interesting to answer, to take a break here. And then I do have some slides on misinformation and AI too.
Okay, thank you. And so let us let you catch your breath. There's a question that I think is ready for you to take now, which is from Sonny Musa. My question is, when there is competition between media organizations, more especially local media, and I want my channel to be the first in breaking the news to my audience, is it necessary to follow these rules, or is there an easier way to break news quickly, accurately, while still integrating what you're advising?
Good question. So I do think sometimes newsrooms push back or are hesitant to be transparent because they are concerned that Maybe it's a competitive concern, right? That their competition may learn a little too much about how they do their process and then copy it and maybe beat them on stories. That absolutely is something that does exist. I think there also is concern that if they are too transparent and they do something differently another time, there's this accountability aspect too that can be scary. And so, to the competition question or point of that, I again really, and I'm looking at this through the lens that I do feel that journalism is a public service. And I know working in investigative journalism myself, oftentimes by being transparent, there were concerns that if you asked people a question on social media that, oh, the competition could quickly do your story. I really believe that if your story is vetted, you're adding context, you kind of have all those elements, you're not going to get beat in that same way. They're already one step behind, probably two or three steps behind. So I would say worry less about that because you're going to add these elements that's just going to make your content better and more helpful and more useful. Now, the accountability thing also is scary. And I think it's worth bringing up because people will hold you accountable. If you say, when I cover crime coverage, we are not going to use mugshots, or we're going to follow our crime coverage from the beginning to the end of when someone is fully convicted, actually, and not just charged. Well, if you don't do that, people will maybe call you out for that. So as you're being transparent, make sure that you can stand behind what you say you are going to do. If you say you only use anonymous sources in very specific ways, make sure that that is the case. I know it can be scary to be held accountable, but we hold others accountable all the time. And I think if we're really going to work on this trust issue, we need to be willing to be held accountable ourselves.
Thank you very much. I think you can still take this question from Mohammed.
Yeah.
Is this right that people trust the news when they start to consume the news for the first time and they gradually lose trust in the news? If yes, or if not, what are the reasons that people lose trust or don't trust the news?
That is a great question. And I think, unfortunately, if you look at the state of trust over time, you see that trust in information, trust in news has slowly declined over years, over decades, really. It's not something that just happened overnight, although we have seen kind of steep declines more recently. But it's actually something that has taken a lot of time. So it's been kind of a lot of different things that have contributed to this, whether that's more opinion coverage, 24-hour news coverage, talk radio, the internet, social media, politicians, kind of all of these things, right? So I think back 30, 40 years ago, it would be kind of a better assumption to say that people did trust in news. Kind of that was something they were grown up thinking about or that they were taught. Unfortunately, now, I don't know that that is the case. Distrusting in news and media has become sort of this badge of honor, unfortunately. Like it's the cool thing to say, even if people know that they believe it or not. And so it's actually interesting because there's some research that's ongoing now, specifically here in the US, and maybe you have some examples in your own country where it's going to be interesting to see how younger people, if they automatically trust in information and news or they don't, and then where they go to consume news. So, working in TV here in the US, a lot of times people said, oh, well, children will just turn on whatever their parents watched because that's what they saw their parents watching. Well, if their parents aren't turning on news anymore, if you don't see that newspaper delivered to you anymore, if for a lot of people, getting news means scrolling and the child doesn't know, are you on TikTok? Are you on Facebook? Or are you reading a news article, right? You don't know. And these conversations aren't happening. How does that impact the child's likelihood to sort of basically replicate what they saw their parents do. And that tended to be something that was like a very strong connection for people. So there's some research that needs to be done on that. I know some researchers are looking at that, and I'm going to be really, really interested to see what they learn. And then what can we do? Is there a role journalists can play? And then just as society, how can we foster conversation around news consumption with younger generations if they're not seeing it how others saw it because it's not on TV, it's not the newspaper being delivered.
Yes, we have Ebrina on the line to ask question live. If Ebrina can quickly talk, if not, I have a question I want you to take. This question goes to us. In a situation where trust in the news agents, okay, sorry, where's that one? Okay. If you ask community people to submit their news about the problem facing them for publication, is it appropriate for the journalists or the media house to ask them to pay for the story before or after publishing? So it's all about the ethics of paywall when we are actually asking the people to be the one to actually suggest the news. Oh, that thought. I think Ebrina is
Yes.
ready. Ebrima, are you
Okay.
ready to ask your question live?
Hello, can you hear
Ye-
me?
Yes, we
Yes.
can hear you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. And I'm very glad and pleased to be part of this session today. I live in the Gambia, West Africa, and I'm a journalist by profession, but currently working as a data and communication assistant for the Gambia Red Cross Society. And misinformation nowadays is like it's very common. It's easier for people to share misinformation than accurate information. So especially with the challenges we are facing with these social media handles that have to do with Facebook and other stuff. So what can we do as journalists to have access to information that you know is correct and it will not have an impact on the society itself?
Great question. And I do, after we take a couple questions, I'm actually going to go through what journalists can do
Okay.
specifically to build trust, to do that misinformation and disinformation. So if it's okay, hopefully you can stay on so I can answer the question that Paul posed and then go back to that if that's
Yes,
okay.
yes, please.
Okay. Okay, so I'll go back to the question. I'm forgetting who it was from exactly, but it was about the paywall. And basically, if we are asking people to give us story ideas or tell us what they want information on, is it then fair, ethical for us to then put it behind a paywall? So, I really do wish that we could live in a world where we didn't have to have a paywall. Like, I wish that was the reality. And for a lot of news organizations, they are able to do that. You look at television, maybe, for example, you look at nonprofit news organizations, they operate in a way that can potentially allow for no paywall. Everyone has freedom of access. I wish that all newsrooms were able to sustain themselves that way because, again, I do believe it's the public service. Now, unfortunately, that's not the reality of the world that we live in. And so we have to make money in some cases. So we have to have that subscription, we have to have that paywall. Something I would suggest is for a lot of news organizations that have a paywall, they allow so many articles maybe for free. So maybe when you are thinking about, instead of maybe it being a number of articles, maybe it is a type of article. Maybe it is certain articles that are free. And I think making stories that answer specific community questions could be a good category for maybe making some of that free because it's maybe more informative, explanatory. You saw a lot of newsrooms do this with COVID-19, with other crisis situations. They'll say, we're making this content free because we feel it's our main goal to inform. But then adding an explanation that says, we still do need support to continue though. So if you can subscribe, if you can donate, please do that here. So that's kind of a suggestion I have. And again, I think we can have the ideal reality of what we want, and then we have reality. And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, that paywall is necessary. And so explaining that and talking about that while also giving some value to content that can be free is important.
Thank you very much, Lynn. I think we have lots of questions
Yeah.
to lapse through,
Well,
but
let me,
what I think we can do is let's resume with the
yeah,
concluding session, and if you can provide adequate enough time to deal with all of these
yeah.
questions. What I'll say to those that are listening is please keep the questions coming. We are going to endeavor to go through as many of them as possible, and we already know the rules already. Those that want to ask the questions live, we have accommodation for that. Just raise your hand and we would activate your mic at the right time. So I'll let Lynn resume the second session of our training.
Thank you so very much. I'm going to focus a little bit on that misinformation, disinformation. I think the first part of that question that was just asked was, how can journalists make sure that the information they are getting, I think that was part of the question, the information they're getting and that they are then providing is accurate and they're not getting kind of caught up in being deceived. So I didn't have some slides for that, but I will kind of address that just right now. I do think it's really important for us as journalists to fact check and understand how technology has advanced so much, especially with AI, and how deceptive it potentially can be. So we as journalists, we as newsrooms do have a responsibility to stay up to date with what people can do, with how to detect, with working to detect, and making sure we're building in time to detect and fact check and make sure to verify what's being sent in, especially if it's content or images or video that we did not take, we did not shoot, right? We want to make sure that we are building that time in, that we are maybe even holding back from publishing until we've done that due diligence. That's really important. But then the question is, okay, what can we do? Like, how does misinformation, disinformation relate to trust? Well, the very kind of basic thing when it comes to misinformation and disinformation, again, if you are someone who works at a fact-checking organization, you probably know this well, but this idea that misinformation, disinformation, it thrives in an information void. So when people do not know something about a question, about a topic, and they can't find the information and they don't know it, they just kind of will fill it with whatever they are finding, whether that's a conversation from friends, something they found when they Googled it, something that they found on social. So our goal as journalists, how can we actually fill that gap, that information void with the facts, with actual information? Write these stories, publish these stories in a way that are reaching people where they are. So on social media, we're making sure our headlines are written in a way that can be optimized for people to find when they're searching for these things. And there's also this idea of like when to know when to cover misinformation and disinformation, because you don't want to amplify it if you don't have to. And so I'm sure a lot of you are aware, but there's a concept called the tipping point from First Draft. And I think it's really, really a good concept and way to think about, should you cover this rumor or should you not? And things to consider with it. And basically, they kind of have 5 questions for you to consider before you may cover it or bring more attention to it. One is how much engagement, how many people basically are kind of talking about the rumor? Is it spreading widely online? Is that discussion or the spreading of that information limited to one community? Is it multiple communities? That's something to consider. Is it just on one platform? Like, is it just happening on X? Is it just happening on Facebook? Or is it kind of on all the platforms? Who's sharing this information? Is it someone that is considered an influencer, someone who is a politician, someone who can give it some authority? And then our larger media outlets covering it. So this is something, if you haven't heard of it, definitely to use. I think it is very helpful. And they have other tips as well there for covering this information. Now, from a trust standpoint, when it comes to how to use your combating of misinformation and disinformation to build trust. If you are fighting misinformation, if your goal is to help your community combat misinformation, to provide accurate information and fill that information void, tell your audience that. Let's tell them, hey, we want to make sure you don't get the wrong information when you're online. Here's what we're doing to prevent that. And so here are some examples of how newsrooms have done this. One, you can just write something about it and share it often on social media. So saying things like, in this newsroom, we stand for facts, we stand for truth. We know that the information health of our community is important for overall public health. That means we investigate rumors circulating in the community. We delete misinformation when it appears in comments on our website and on social media. I think sometimes as news organizations, we think, oh my gosh, we can't delete people's comments. Like, they have a right to share their opinion. They have a right to speak freely, which, yes, people do. But if they're spreading information that is false, that is incorrect, and it's not clear that it's their opinion, that can actually contribute negatively to the accurate information we're putting out there. That actually is not helpful. So if we say that we are an organization that wants to have people consume accurate information, we can get rid of those comments and should. Let's stop them from spreading, especially when it's on our own platforms. Now, if you are going to do things like that, you want to make sure that you tell people that's part of your policy, right? We will be deleting content that is inaccurate. And that is something that, oh, and I don't have that example here. Sorry, I thought I did. But we've had newsrooms on their Facebook page, on different other social media accounts say, if you share information that's incorrect, that's a rumor, that's not accurate, we will be deleting it. Get on the record about that. The other thing you can do is actively seek tips. Have people tell you things that they want to be fact-checked, that they're confused about, that they're unsure if it's true. Now, this can get overwhelming. This could become a full-time job for multiple people in your newsroom. So if you're going to do this, make sure that you have the ability to at least check some of them, and that you explain that you may not be able to get to all of them. Because what you don't want to do is have people submit things, never hear back from you. That can actually lead to distrust. So say that you're putting this out there, you're going to try your best to get to as many as possible. Maybe you share how you decide which ones to cover, which ones not to. Maybe there's a specific time of day where you have someone in a WhatsApp group on text where there's a certain number, people text with questions, and for 2 hours every day or 2 hours a week, a reporter is going to be answering questions that way and fact-checking things. So there are different ways to do it, but the idea here is to say, we want to help you navigate this confusing landscape. Tell us what we can help you know. This is an example that PolitiFact has. Suggest an item to check. Suggest a fact check. So that's one way you can do it. Fill out this form. But again, you can set it up different ways. Maybe they email you. Maybe it's a specific time when you're checking a text or a WhatsApp group or a Facebook chat, something like that. Another great way that you can combat misinformation and disinformation and build trust is to teach people how to navigate the news. This education piece and this role that journalists can play, educating the public, this media literacy, but also, when we look at things like AI and other technology, like how technology works, how information flows, being a source of information in providing and education and help to people for this can really help you become a trusted source for them. Sometimes this means maybe you write something or you publish a story that's very specific about how to do something. So we've had newsrooms explain how to navigate a social feed, how to tell if political polls are credible. How do political polls even work, right? People don't necessarily understand that. So explaining that type of things. How can you tell if an image or video has been manipulated or not? If we can provide this information to make things easier for people and be helpful and answer these questions, that is something that can build trust. Now, you may be thinking, oh no, that's creating more content. I don't know if I have time for that. Valid, totally valid issue, right? So go find resources that have already been created. There are lots of media literacy organizations out there where you can reuse something they've explained. You can reuse an image they created, a social card that has graphics explaining how to tell if an image or video has been manipulated. Make sure it's a trusted source. Make sure that what they're doing is accurate, which in a lot of cases, these media literacy organizations are. But repurpose their content. You also could have a standing newsletter or social posts that kind of maybe once a week you give a tip about how to find information online. And you do that for like a week. Those are things that you can do to help educate. The other thing you can do is show what makes your coverage credible. And here's that example I was that I mentioned earlier. Explain what you are trying to do, explain what makes your information credible, and just post it online, share it. And so in this case, this newsroom on Facebook said, you know, we're removing posts that are purely speculation regarding COVID. And why are they doing it? Well, they're doing it because these unconfirmed bits of information can add to public panic and hysteria. We don't want that. We want people to have informed, confirmed, reliable information. So if you have a tip or you hear something you'd like to share or unsure if it's true, send us a private message. So instead of just like adding something in the comment, send us a private message so we can help you there. But we want to public facing in our spaces where we're sharing information, make sure that it's accurate and it's truthful. The other thing you can do is if people are accusing you of manipulating images or accusing other people of manipulating images, explain to them if that image was manipulated or not, how you know that, what you don't know. In this case, this was a journalist in Florida, and he was accused of, because there were different angles of photos and video showing how packed a beach was in Florida after COVID. Some people said, oh, we think your images are manipulated. You're not telling us the whole truth. So he decided to take the different images. Some were photos, some were like a screen grab from his live shot. So different perspectives of different cameras and different positioning. One was the helicopter overhead. And he basically explained in a Facebook post, hey, these look different because they're coming from different angles. When you have a helicopter view, that's going to look very different than when you see me standing in front of the crowd during a live shot. So addressing these things head on can also help. Another thing you can do is that defending your work is important. So in this case, a reporter did a story and the headline was, "New public art at Denver International Airport comes with a $6 million price tag." So that was the story. This group on Facebook, this Colorado Union of Taxpayers, shares the reporter's story and says Colorado taxpayers pay for this junk, and then shared the story. Well, it turns out taxpayers actually are not paying for the art. Yes, the art is called public art, but it's not paid for with tax dollars. So the reporter saw them share this and said, hey, just want to let you know, one, thanks for sharing it, but yes, it's public art, but it actually was not paid for with taxpayer dollars. And so I want to just clarify that so all your people who are seeing this know that. Now, the one thing about paying attention to comments, which we have on our website, different tips for this and monitoring comments, when to respond, when not to respond, how to respond. But it's important to keep in mind that when you respond to one person, you're not just responding to them, you're responding to anyone else who saw their question, who saw their criticism. So you're responding to way more than that. So sometimes that time that it takes to respond can really pay off because it's not just about that one person's comment you're responding to. Everyone else can see it, so you're getting on the record and defending your work more broadly. So I want to quickly go through some things related to AI too. And I'm going to do this very quickly because I want to take more time. I know there are lots of questions. And I know there's also a longer session on AI, I think, still coming later. One of the things related to trust and technology in general, but specifically AI, we do feel that transparency about the use of AI and disclosure is really important. The main reason that's important is we don't want people to feel deceived or tricked if we don't tell them that we used AI when we did. When people find out that they've been lied to, that they thought something was a real photo taken by a photographer, turns out it wasn't, that can make people angry, feel deceived, and not trust you or your content. I think a perfect example is what we're seeing going on with Kate Middleton right now. That creates distrust. Now, probably almost every post that she may do for maybe ever is going to be questioned. So we need to think about that as journalists from a trust standpoint. We need to be transparent and disclose the use of AI, but it's also, I think, the ethical thing to do. Now, then there are lots of questions about how often are you disclosing? How are you disclosing? Where are you disclosing? And I will say, those are all things that I think we need more research on. I do not have best practices ready to give you on that yet. And there are questions about if you use spell check, is that an AI that you should be disclosing? Personally, I don't think you need to disclose at that level, but I think it's going to vary for each newsroom, how you use it, what you're using. And we need a little more research behind some of that, but that transparency and disclosure is going to be important. The other important thing, if we want to build trust with technology, is how are we helping people understand the technology, understand AI? It goes back to that example about explaining what zoning means, explaining how elections work, kind of that on-ramp to things. Can we provide definitions? Can we as an industry come up with shared language around these tools? What it means to use them, categorize them, to make people better understand what's being used by journalists. I think that's going to be also really important. But if we just tell people this article used AI, we don't know what they're assuming. They're probably assuming that a person never touched the article, never was involved in the story. And in a lot of cases, that's probably not the case. So we need to get a little more specific. We need to provide a little more information and link to definitions so people understand exactly what you're talking about. And then again, educate. So we talked about with misinformation, media literacy. When it comes to AI, I think there's a huge opportunity for people, for journalists, to build trust by educating the public. I think in the past with technology, I don't feel that journalists and media as a whole has really done a great job doing this. And I think we've missed an opportunity to be that resource, to be that space or be that host to host conversations and answer questions about technology, about social media, about how it all works. And I'm hoping maybe we will use AI as an opportunity to do that. Host conversations in the community. Have your journalists be the one answering questions, or at least bringing people together to talk about it and hear what they think, what their worries are, what their concerns are. Bringing in an expert to explain how all of this works. If we can do that, I really think it could help us build these relationships and build trust in us as individuals and as newsrooms, and keep them coming back for other news and other content. And so this is an example of something that the News Literacy Project created that can be reshared. It can be reshared by news publications. So remember when I said, if you don't want to create the content, others out there will, and you can share the content. This would be an example of that. You could share this on social media. You could do a story on air. But how I think education is really a way that we can build trust. And with that education, I think comes that engagement element. Let's ask our community, how are they using AI? How are they using technology? What are they worried about? What are they comfortable with? Let's be those people to guide those conversations. We can then also learn from them to see how are we going to use it in our own content, and how are we going to share what we're doing, because we can learn from where they are, get a baseline of where the community is. But also, again, we're being that source for hosting those conversations, which can build trust. And so I had some examples of how people explain AI. I'm not going to go over that right now, but those are in the deck. I want to just also say, I know I've been talking for a while. I want to take some time to answer more questions here before we close out. But I do hope that trusting news can be a resource for you. We really know that this work can make a difference. It can have impact. It can build trust. And so we try to make this as easy as possible for you to do. So on our website, we have things called trust kits, and they explain step by step how to do something very specific. One is, how do you respond to comments? We have a trust kit on that. If you're curious about how to do it, when to do it, how it works, that trust kit will walk you through how to do it. Maybe you want to build trust on air. We have a whole kit dedicated to that. Maybe you want to build trust with sources. We have something that walks you through how to better do that. And then we also have a weekly newsletter where, if you want kind of the most up-to-date information on some research related to trust and news, or you want the latest tips, see newsroom examples, that's the best place to get that too. So I'm going to stop sharing and just see. I'm also going to put a link here in the chat to this slideshow so that you can have it. And I'm going to put my email here as well if you want to get in touch.
That's really, really, really lovely. Thank you. Thank you very much. So, okay, let me see. Yes, so we have lots of questions.
Yes, I see there are a lot of questions. I don't know if there was anything that stood out to you, Paul, or
while we are doing that, okay, we have Maria. Maria is raising her, so probably we
okay.
can allow
Yeah.
Maria to talk.
Let's
Maria,
do
are you
that.
ready?
Yes, yeah, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely. Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I also put my question in the chat, but the reason I raised my hand is because I need to leave soon. So I just want to have that question answered before possible. So I think I was reflecting on the problem about why a lot of people start distrusting news. And I think what I often see is that it's not just like that they don't understand, or like for some people it's not about not understanding how journalism works, but I think more that they are seeing biases or unethical storytelling from sources that present themselves as neutral and trustworthy. And I think it's especially when it comes to like Western media reporting about, for example, non-white people or non-Western countries, and want to ask whether that's also something, you know, you are looking at and how you're addressing this basically.
Yes, thank you so much, because that's something that I normally kind of include and I didn't. So I want to, that's actually, thank you, a good reminder. So when people think of media or news, they are lumping a lot of things together. They're lumping your work as a responsible ethical journalist, right? But they're also putting things in there that even you look at and you're like, that's not journalism. That's not ethical. We would never do that, right? But people are putting all of that in one box. And so, one, it's good to recognize that. And when you're talking to people and they are complaining or saying, oh, well, news organizations, they pay all their sources they talk to. Well, there are cases where that has happened. There are cases where that has happened with actually, news organizations that we may consider ethical, right? There are news organizations that we don't consider news organizations, but people do that all the time. So one thing is you want to explain to people that, unfortunately, yes, maybe that has happened, or ask them specifically for the example they're talking about. So get to specifics and say, yes, if that happened, that is not ethical. That is not what I would consider responsible reporting. Here's how we do it. Can I talk to you about how I do it? And so that's kind of that counter narrative I mentioned at the very top, which I didn't spend a ton of time on, but that's creating that counter narrative. You are doing it differently. You have this standard. This is how you do it. Some of these other things about sensationalizing absolutely are true. You are committed to not doing those things. The other thing you can do is then also use it as an opportunity to say, why don't you tell me a little bit about how you consume information? Like, where are you going? Where do you go to get information? Could we talk a little bit about that? Could I add some thoughts to that? So the one thing is most people will say, well, I don't read the news. Yet they scroll on social media a lot during the day. They're seeing information, they're seeing content. And so explaining that there is information on the platform, but how can they fact check? Maybe suggesting some alternatives or people to follow could also be helpful.
Thank you very much. We have Daniel. Well, if Daniel can quickly ask questions, I want to combine two questions that have been submitted. I think they are both around accountability from the media. For instance, when a media outlet has published something that the fact-checking process did not pick the misleading information. So how do you suggest going about it? What do you think is the guideline when there is this the information that was not properly fact checked had already been released by a media house and has really gone viral that people are already using that information? How do you rein that back in?
So I think the question is, and I'm not sure if this is like within your own publication, if something was published, or if other organizations
No, within your
publish
organization.
something within your organization. Okay, so something made it out of kind of the editing process. It was published. Unfortunately, that ended up not being true. Okay, so corrections are so important. I know corrections are scary. I know journalists don't like to say that they made a mistake, but if we want to build trust, we have to admit when we have done something wrong, when we've made a mistake, and we should do this with humility and talk about how we are going to prevent it from happening the next time. So the first thing is, if you produced information that's incorrect, please correct the information. Do it quickly. Don't look at it as this, oh my gosh, like we want to try to avoid it. We don't want to bring more attention to it. Please, please correct it. We know that correcting can help build trust. The other thing is then to kind of look at internally, how did this happen and how can we prevent it from happening moving forward? And then consider publicly talking about that. We looked into it, and you don't have to give all the details of like maybe the reporter's name, the editor's name, producer's name, but this is how it happened. That is something that broke down in our system, and we are committed to doing it differently moving forward. And here's how we're going to do that. And
Thank
like, and say sorry. I know it's like, we hate to say sorry. We want to always be right, but sorry can go a long way. And we should be sorry if we did that.
Thank you very much. Daniel, one last time. Okay. So we'll take this question from Christopher. I think Christopher is also on the line. Christopher, if you are ready to ask your question live, you have the mic. I'm going to do something. I'm just going to open everybody's mic and see who talks the first.
Hello.
Yes.
Yes. Hi,
Christopher, go ahead, please.
Yeah, Lynn, thank you for this opportunity. I'm Christopher from Ghana. My problem concerning trust issue is what we have been facing here in Ghana is that mostly we may be having a good content to publish or add in our various media, but it seems we are under some umbrella that whenever that umbrella shakes, we all shiver. To what extent, especially politicians in Ghana here, you might get a genuine and a truth content to publish to the masses, but these authorities will be interfering. They may be thinking that the news or content may tarnish their reputations. So they just interfered with some threats, underground threats and whatsoever. You know, these top men too also control the system here in Ghana. So most of the times, there have been some cases that we don't have our freedom to do whatever we're supposed to do professionally. So
Christopher, I think the question is, even when you've done the fact checking and because of the pressure, sometimes when the authoritarian governments control everything, even when you are actually factual, they might still say that what you are publishing is wrong and still have to deal with that, having the machinery of the government behind you. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I know, and it depends, different locations and where you are, and the different government pressures are different. And so there are different things that you are able to do. And in some cases, the very limited things that you are able to do. So the first thing is, you want to make sure any information you're ready to share, that you are making sure it's accurate, you're fact checking. Personally, if you are trying, let's say that you publish something and then the government's like, no, that's not true. What can you do to show that what you are sharing is true? So that transparency of showing maybe notes, showing full video interviews, releasing full audio interviews if you can be helpful. You're kind of combating that with kind of more information, kind of more transparency.
Okay.
The other thing that kind of data, it can really help if that's something that's possible. The other thing you can do is, can you reach out to trusted sources in the community and build relationships with people? So it's not necessarily you sharing your information. Maybe it's someone that the community trusts. Maybe it's a priest. Maybe it's someone who works at a specific, maybe it's a gym, maybe, all these different community places, right? A grocery store where people trust that person, a farmer. Can you find those people, build those relationships, and have them be someone to help you spread what you are doing and spread your information?
Thank you very much. So we have the panel we have Daniel, GB, Dancy, Pfizer, who is ready to go live. Yes.
Hello, everyone. This is
Yeah.
me, Faiza
Okay.
from Kashmir.
Okay.
I have a question.
Please go ahead.
What strategy has ICFJ found most effective in ensuring the accuracy and reliability of fact-checking content, particularly in combating the spread of misinformation and disinformation?
Okay. Thank you very much. Next person.
Yes, good evening, Lynn and Paul. GB Moses from South Sudan. I'm really very happy to have attended this session. The way Lynn broke down all the topics was very interesting, and I'm very happy. You know, I'm a fact checker. I don't have much previous experience in journalism, but through these trainings, I've come to realize, I've come to learn a lot, and then fact checking is very important in journalism, and journalism is very important in fact checking.
Okay.
So yeah, there's one thing that I wanted to say, but she has already said it. At 211 Check, we have a correctional policy. When we do a fact check, we put a form at the end of every article to call the public, to tell them, if you see this, if you know this thing, this article has mistakes, you give us with the correct information. So for you to tell us this is wrong, you have to give us the evidences, and then if the evidences are verified beyond doubts that ours is wrong, then we don't put ours down, but we publish another one and tell the public that the other one was wrong, but this one is the correct one. So correctional policy should be one of that. Correctional policy should be one of the key thing. Then secondly, I also go to the AI. AI is good. It came to help us as journalists, fact checkers, and everybody in our work. But it's like there's a way the public is receiving it with the negativity. We all think AI come with all the negative part of it. It doesn't have positives, but it has a lot of positives depending on how we use it. So I think media literacy is really very serious. We really need to do a lot of work and teach our people that AI is good and we can use it for the benefit of ourselves in media and in fact checking. I had two friends from Gambia who was complaining, and then one from Ghana still complaining on how to. I'm sorry, I'm taking a lot of time, but yeah, I think they are journalists. They don't have maybe access to fact checking, but I would advise them. In Ghana, there are a lot of fact checking organizations. There's Globawa, there's Africa Check, and there are others. Let them try to reach out. They will give them enough information and even knowledge, so that all this will help ease their work. And I'm really very happy that I've attended these sessions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, GB.
Yes,
Next person.
Yeah, and I was just going to say really quickly, sorry, Paul, if you have a link to that correction policy, please put it in the chat. We'd love to take a look because that'd be great to see.
Okay, thank you. Next person, please. Make it very brief. We have a lot of people on the queue. Hello?
Hello, Paul.
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, Paul. All right. This is Nyongam Sendasi from the armed conflict hit regions of Cameroon. My question is, in journalism, there is the ethical value of protection of sources by journalists. Does regular release of crucial sources not breach this ethic? That is what I want to know as a practicing peace journalist here. And a last one, quickly. I practice journalism, peace journalism, precisely in an area that is hit by an armed conflict, the Anglophone crisis in Cameroon. And as a journalist, I have been subject of several threats because of the work I do. So the population here is largely media illiterate. The political and elite class take advantage of this to polarize the media in this part of the country. So they create their own media organs and they filter these media organs with cook-up stories. So you can get up one good day and you find 10 newspapers carrying one headline, and it's a banner. And whenever some of us come out to do this fact checking and to counter this information, we usually run into a high risk, especially life-threatening risks. So how can we be able to go through this as journalists who are into empowering the truth?
Thank you very much. I think what is about state-backed disinformation. So what tips can you quickly share, Lynn?
Yeah, I think again, anything you can do to reach people like where they are, and again, through sources they already trust. So I would try, you know, sometimes just putting something out there like a newsletter or even something printed may not be that effective if they don't know who you are. So can you find these trusted community sources to build those relationships, and maybe they are the ones sharing that accurate information with people, because people tend to be, there's some research on this, they tend to trust people they already know or already are those trusted sources. So if you're already combating something as hard as government propaganda, it might be useful to go around it to have other people maybe help you disseminate that information that you're creating, those trusted sources in the community.
Thank you very much. Hajibola Mzat. Gitunga Njiru, it's your turn.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you very much, Lynn. And I think I put my question on the chat. So I was just trying to, when you were talking about the trust, I wanted to find out whether there is any correlation between trust and revenue growth. And if you ever come across any news organization that is, focusing so much on trust, and because of that, they are recording commercial success. And if you can reference any empirical study to show that.
Thank you very much.
So we have had some newsrooms who have tried to, or who have tied transparency language and the trust language directly to then having a subscription ask. So asking people to subscribe or continue to support that work. What we have found is that people, when that trust language was there, when that transparency language was there, people were more likely to click on the link to subscribe and to subscribe. We also found in newsletters, a lot of newsletters say, help support this work, donate here, or something like that. Instead, if you add language about your goals and your mission there, and that actually has also led to increases in people clicking to potentially subscribe and donate, and donations.
Thank you very much. Gitunga, are you ready? We also have Ashraf Sharif. Who among you is ready?
Can you hear me?
Yes, please, we can hear you, Gitunga.
Yes, I was asking an earlier question. Sometimes when I write stories, there are some readers sometimes who try to have malicious comments to discredit a good story, and sometimes they try to, based on experience, they try to make someone look maybe they are not competent at what they are doing. So I want maybe to make a comment on that.
Yes. So really quickly, I would say it's important that, again, I mentioned this a little bit, but as a news organization, we can take ownership of our comments, and whether that's on social media or on our website, right? So if we say we will not allow for hateful comments, people attacking comments, name calling, say that. And then if someone does do that, delete their content, delete their comment. That is absolutely totally fair. And we should be doing that if we say we want to foster conversations and an environment where people are allowed to have conversations where they're not harassed and they can feel safe doing so. So that is, we also, and I'll put a link here to our trust kit for comments. We have some more information on that.
Okay, thank you. We have Ashraf, Rabi, and Hali. So who is ready? Rabi, I think you're ready. You can go ahead with
I'm ready, Paul. I'm ready. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
Lynn, Paul, and friends around the world, namaste. I am Ravi Rajbaral from Nepal. I'm the founder and editor of a website called Media Kurakani. Thank you very much for raising the issue of trust and credibility, Lynn. Economic crisis is really important, but the credibility crisis is another. So my question is, how important is it to question and critique media and journalists and their narrative? How important is it to watch the watchdogs, and how does it help for the media credibility and transparency and accountability? What is your perspective? Thank you very much, Paul, Lynn.
Thank you. So I think is it helpful to criticize the media, Paul? Is that kind of what the question was?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So it goes back to, I think, a question earlier we had where, like, is it okay to differentiate yourself? Basically say, like, what they're doing there is unethical. Like, we would never do that. That actually is fine to do. Now, you want to do it in a way that is respectful and, again, is thinking about the community. You're not saying, oh my gosh, look how great we are. You're instead saying, we are committed to doing it differently because we care about getting you information. This is about you. This is about the community. And we would not do it that way because we find that that is unethical.
Okay.
If you draw attention to the negative, I would say offer the positive or an alternative because you want to be helpful. One thing people complain about a lot is the negativity in the news. It's not helpful. So if you're going to criticize, well, what's the solution? What's the alternative? Kind of provide that at the same time.
Thank you very much. Ali and Ashraf, it's your turn. Ali, you go. Your mic is.
Hello.
Hi, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I have a question. I'm a journalist from Pakistan, especially from tribal area. We have information when we are in field, but we can't spreading the information in news. What we will do in this situation?
Did you get that, Lynn?
Yes, sorry. Could you, Paul, summarize that again? Sorry, it was
Ali,
coming
can
through.
you take the question again? Can you ask the question again, please?
We have information means we have information in the field, but we can't spreading this information in news. What we will do in this situation, because we are tribal, we are living in very hard place and hard area. If we have information, but we can't separate the information in news, because there is for a journalist we face very hardship during and coverage. So what we will do in this situation?
Okay, thank you very
Yeah.
much.
So thinking of ways of, and I'm not sure, it depends where you are exactly what the issue is. Is it, government censorship? Is it the government preventing it? Are there things you can do to get around it through technological ways by using maybe messenger apps that are encrypted? I know Radio Free Europe is an organization we have worked with often, and they do things like creating onion sites. I mean, that kind of thing to get around it. The other thing is, can you potentially consider, if this is safe or not, to go offline? Do you host events where there are conversations? Are you maybe printing flyers and hanging them? I don't know, there are lots of different things, but I know that safety is definitely of concern, and you want to definitely be careful and just see, okay, how can we do it safely for ourselves, but then also for the people who are sending us information and trying to be sources for us.
Thank you very much. We have Ashraf and Mavis, who is ready. I've also added Mohammed. Who amongst you is ready?
Hello, Paul, can you
Mavis.
hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Mavis.
All right, thanks for this opportunity. I'm Mavis and I'm speaking from Ghana. So in Ghana here, there are media houses that are affiliated to political parties, just as Christopher said earlier. So if I happen to do a fact check story and my media house is affiliated to this particular political party, which fact check I've done, and they are sitting on a story, they are not willing to publish it. If I find myself in this situation, what should I do as a journalist?
Okay, thank you very much. Do you want
Yeah,
to
is
take that,
there,
Lynn?
yeah, is there any way, one thing I would consider is, can you use your personal profiles possibly on social media? Is there a way to potentially share that, like on Facebook or something like that? Again, I know potentially if you do that, I know there probably is a risk of getting fired or losing a job or something like that. So you want to be careful about that. If you can raise awareness of that in some way too. But I know it's really, really frustrating situation. I'm sorry to hear about that. And just if you can do workarounds, do it. But again, make sure you think about what those implications could be for yourself.
Thank you very much. Mohammed, it's your turn. Followed by Harpan. Harpan, you also have the floor.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Hello,
Yes.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Mohammed. And we have Hebrima too. I think we can, if anybody still can talk.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you very much. Nice for having me back again. The question I want to ask here is, in my country here, the Gambia, we are not more of fact checking because we have few people who do fact checking in this country. Because as I'm speaking right now, there is already a lot of things surrounding fact checking in this country. And if you take a good look what is happening in this country, most of the media houses rely on print newspapers for their source of information, for their source of stories or news stuffs, whatever. So the question I want to ask here is, how can you help? Is there any means you can help our country so that at least we'll get to know more about fact checking in order to deal with any story, so that we'll fact check and know exactly how to publish a particular story?
Okay.
Because there are media houses in this country who will charge people based on the stories they are about to air for them. So, and you cannot have a human interest story on hand, and at the same time, you want to charge somebody to pay an extra amount in order for you to air that particular story, which you already know is an human interest story. So, how can you people help so that the country will get to know what is fact checking, and we can engage and involve ourselves in fact checking, and the journalists will do more of fact checkings in this country in order to be just surrounded around the journalism system of reporting or packaging stories or whatever.
Thank you very much. I think it's all around the business model of journalism and how we can still encourage fact checking and bring attention to it. For me, I think my comment would be that we have lots of fact checking, Africa focused fact checking initiatives, organizations, groups that are actively involved with this. If we're talking about getting good stories published without financial incentives, I think this is at the level of individual media houses. Policies differ from one media organization to another. And I believe the audience would be able to actually see which media organization can be trusted, which goes back to the issue that Lynn mentioned regarding maintaining and restoring trust in the media. Do you have anything to add to that? Before I think I want to take the last two live questions. So we have Sonny Musa and Yaya. Yes, those are the two last comments I want to have. Who is ready to go amongst you, Sonny Musa and Yaya? We have lots of questions already. If none of them is ready, I can quickly take one. And okay, let's take Arpan's question. Is that as we know, printed media around the world, is it accurate to say individuals have faith in the news when they first start consuming it and their confidence erodes with time? I think you've answered that question already. I've asked you that question already. Mohammed's question, my question is about fact checking. That being a print media journalist, I have a right to information law to get information to get to the information, data, and information story. But there are examples that the department you approach for data share the information that sometimes prove to not be fully correct. Could you guide what alternative sources one could use to produce a fact-based piece? So I think this is a really, really good question. I think the question is around when these original data sources are misleading journalists, and the misinformation is not because of you, but because of the information source that you're supposed to trust that is not, that is misleading. So any thoughts on this?
Yeah, so that's where just again I mentioned, but we as journalists do have to be careful that what are we amplifying? I think even in some cases the government is not a trusted source, right? I think all of you probably know that or have instances where you've experienced that, and so even if the government is telling us something, are we fact checking it, making sure we're doing our due diligence with it, even if it's a source that's been trustworthy before, we have to do our due diligence to fact check every single time and not just take it at that face value, and explaining that process too. And maybe that means sometimes that person who was trusted source is no longer a trusted source for you because of information they've shared recently.
Yes. So how will you describe the line of questions you've been having, Lynn? So what are your thoughts around these conversations?
Yeah, I think it's been great. And I think the only other thing I would say with fact checking is really important. I know ICFJ has so many resources around fact checking. I know Pointer also has a lot of resources around fact checking. So, go there for those resources. If you want information about building trust, please visit those trust kits, visit our website, and don't hesitate to reach out. We are here to help. This is something that we can accomplish. I think it's going to take time, something that is hard, but there are small things we can do every day by being more transparent about how we do our jobs and being willing to listen and engage with the community to hear what they need from us and kind of meet them where they are a little bit. This is about improving. It's not about us doing anything wrong. This is about improving. And I think improvement is great. And I think there are things we can do together. So thank you so much for listening to me talk for 2 hours. I know it's a lot of me. I hope it was helpful. And if you do any of this or you have examples of work that you've done, I'd love to see them. So thank you so much.
I really want to appreciate you, Lynn, for accepting our invitation. And I also want to appreciate everybody that has been part of this dialogue. We know that a lot of questions are still unanswered, but we are really happy that we could answer as much as we can. I would recommend that you join our Facebook community where we share insights, share resources, and keep track of everything that we are continually bringing to your attention. I just dropped the link in the comment box, in the chat box, and I actually want you to actively engage with us so that we can keep you abreast of information. And I think people are asking for the link to the presentation. Link, can you still paste the link again to the presentation, and
Yes.
so that we can have access, our members can have access to this presentation. And I'm also going to share it in our Facebook forum. And I encourage you once again to be a member of our Facebook group so that we can always bring this information to you. It's really, really beautiful that the journey we started. So the link I just dropped in the chat box takes you directly to the Facebook forum. We are going to accept you, and we are going to provide you access with even more resources. I've downloaded the slides. So if you are struggling to access it, I will share these slides at the end of this session right away in that particular forum. So on behalf of the International Center for Journalists, I want to appreciate Lynn for accepting our invitation. You've been an extraordinarily brilliant and amazing facilitator. And I think we've been lucky this time that all our facilitators have been brilliant. And it's awesome that we are able to be together every week to learn about this. And the goal for this session, for next session, had already started when Lynn started talking about started talking about artificial intelligence. And next week we are going to be will be the last session, which will be talking about leveraging artificial intelligence. And we have an AI expert that will be helping us lead the session. So please and please don't miss that session for anything. And I want you to start. I want you to start. I want you to start putting your ideas together, because we are going to make an announcement regarding when the procedure for the grant application. Thank you very much for me, and I say enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks and bye for me. Thank you very much. I like the hearts.